earliest days of our republic, faith in God has always been the ultimate source of the strength that beats in the hearts of our nation. We have to bring religion back. We have to bring it back much stronger. It's one of the biggest problems that we've had over the last long period of time. We have to bring it back. Thomas Jefferson himself once attended Sunday services held in the old house chamber on the very ground where I stand today. So there could be nothing more beautiful than for us to gather in this majestic place. It is majestic, and reaffirm that America is and will always be one nation under God. At every stage of the American story, our country has drawn hope and courage and inspiration from our trust in the Almighty. Deep in the soul of every patriot is the knowledge that God has a special plan and a glorious mission for America. From our president, number 45 and 47, Donald J. Trump.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Axe and Scalpel podcast. I know I can speak for the whole team here that we are thrilled to bring this show to you and begin this adventure into the world of podcast media. So without further ado, let's introduce the team. First up, as we announced in the trailer, a warm welcome to Mr. John Velleber, welcoming him back to the microphone. Johnny V, tell us what it's like to be back behind the mic.
Well, first off, thank you very much, Jacob. Thank you very much, Rick. I'm looking forward to this adventure. I never thought I'd be doing one of these things, so I'm glad that I teamed up with some wonderful brains. But I grew up in Southside, Minneapolis, and I am the grandson of a Lutheran pastor. So I did have religion quite early in my life, which was a blessing. I ended up going to some Lutheran schools. My parents, this is why this podcast is going to be very interesting. My parents said a long time ago they wanted to keep me out of the public schools. They already kind of could see where things were going. So a lot of topics we're going to be talking about today, we're all about the same age and we kind of have the same thought process. It's going to be interesting to find out more about you guys, how you came about your faith and belief in God and relationship with Christ and all the other zany topics I'm sure we're going to be talking about on this podcast in the near future.
So let's dig into that for a minute. So you were a PK, pastor's kid. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about what life was like then as a child. Were you a church and every Sunday kind of kid? What was your faith like?
Yeah, my grandfather's church for the longest time until he retired. And then the private school that I went to in Richfield, Minnesota, if you ever heard of that, That was one of those where if you attend their church, you become members, you get discount on tuition and things of that nature. So that was a very good church, a fantastic pastor there. And then I ended up going to a Lutheran high school. And that was it for the Lutheran schooling. Then I tried my bat out at a couple of colleges, had some good times, and finished out at the Brown Radio School. And that's how I found out about Ladysmith, Wisconsin. And I've lived here basically on and off since 2005.
So Lutheran high school. So I know that some private schools, they're going to be religious or Christian in name largely, and might not be any kind of serious, I don't know, theological training, or there might not be a real serious Christian education. What was your high school like?
Put it this way. Until we became seniors, that school actually participated in one of those slave week deals.
Ooh.
Where seniors purchase freshmen, and for a week, they're you tell them to do something within, didn't get out of hand. Cops were normally not called, aside from the one kid that did get taped to like a stoplight one time. But aside from that, I would say they did their best to preach and educate us on a lot of religion. But I think a lot of times you're still dealing with high school kids.
So a couple things on. So if you don't mind asking, what year did you graduate high school?
1993.
1993. Okay. So yeah, times are different then. Of course, they were for all of us when all of us graduated high school, but the whole concept of a slave week, I'm guessing just in 2025, that just is
no way. No,
especially in Minneapolis.
Right. It was but at the same time, I suppose, most of it was fun. You have your kid, okay, you get to pick one utensil to eat lunch out of. So, of course, you're going to pick the fork, right? But then the guy breaks the middle tongs out of it. And that's what you get to eat for. You get to do that stuff for like a week. Hijinks. A lot of it's just good old-fashioned hijinks. Yeah. Carry a guy's books in his bag everywhere and stuff like that.
So small school, like what was the graduating class?
My graduating class was 22 people, 6 foreign exchange students.
Okay.
Not even kidding.
So small school.
Yep.
Small school.
I'm not very good. We never had like wood shop. So, you know what I mean? When I moved here and I saw a lot of the classes that the kids get to take, especially in this rural area, which is fantastic, small engine classes, wood shop classes, things of that nature that really prepare you for some stuff in life, especially with work and everything. That's one thing that I would say was just kind of a drawback of a lot of the high school. Didn't have the resources for classes like that, but got to learn about the most important thing is having a good relationship with Christ.
Yeah, amen to that. So the other thing I'm curious about too is as somebody who's lived in the Twin Cities for a portion of my life, living in Richfield in 1993, it's a little bit kind of on the edge before urban sprawl had just kind of taken over everything in Minneapolis and surrounding areas. What was life like growing up in Richfield or that area in 1993? Was there still a little bit of the good old days, or had urban sprawl already took over by then?
Very solid. Actually, that was one of the reasons that I grew up in South Minneapolis.
Okay.
Like, it's a terrible way to have to reference where you grew up now, but where the George Floyd stuff happened, that's where I grew up.
Okay.
So, like you said, though, well-educated on the geography of Minnesota.
Yeah.
Richfield's about 15 minutes away from where I lived. So, no, it was suburban. It was actually suburban enough to where the school I went to before, there was no windows in the thing because they kept having like homeless people and stuff breaking windows, trying to get in there and stuff. So really the only windows in this building were those classic entrance ones that had that little chicken wire and stuff in the middle of them. Then I go to this other school in the suburbs, nice building. I felt like a vampire. I normally didn't see sunlight from 8 o'clock to like recess or something. These buildings had windows. I must have looked like a weirdo the first few days. It's like, I'm not used to this. My eyes are just not adjusting to this stuff yet. But yeah, I went there, had a great experience. High school wasn't all that bad. High school was high school. I got to play sports. I don't think I'd probably be able to play some of the sports I did competing with all the real awesome ball players in Minneapolis at the time. So I got to, that worked out pretty good for me. I'm not going to lie. I might not have been a varsity basketball player at Roosevelt or South or something like that. But no, overall, there's very, very good teachers. Overall, I'm happy I did that than the other way.
Maybe most importantly, so we'll finish up, with you, you grew up as grandfather was a pastor, went to a Lutheran high school. Clearly, along the way between those two things growing up, the seed got planted in your faith journey that has stuck with you now all the way through, correct?
Just like everybody else, you have good days and bad days, but you always try to stay.
And then coming back.
Oh, yep. I was fortunate enough to where I was exposed to it at a young age. A lot of people don't. So, I mean, that's one thing I like to kind of take into consider when hearing other people's journeys is, for me, I was extremely fortunate that it was natural, since I had a grandfather that was of the faith, that I was exposed to Christianity at a very, very young age.
Well, the other member of our team, the doctor, Mr. Rick Rapp, welcome to the Axe and Scalpel podcast, sir. Same kind of question for you, my friend. Tell the people who might be listening here tonight, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, how you grew up, and how you came to faith.
Yeah, absolutely. I grew up in the suburbs of Denver, Colorado, on the north end of Denver, and where I was at was the very, edge of the suburbs at that time, and now it's just in the middle of this massive sprawl. But first time at church was also a Lutheran church, 2 weeks old, St. John's Church there in Thornton.
Named after Johnny then, right?
I think that's probably part of it. We got Johnny with the H. So what do they call it? St. Johnny B, Johnny Baptist? No, so both my parents had become Christians in their 20s. So they were trying to raise us and kind of pick that church because it was the only church right in that area. As they were progressing. My dad ended up becoming an elder. My mom was very involved at Sunday school, and I started to see some challenges where a lot of the kids would basically be there, go through confirmation, and then never see them again. And they were just really concerned. They wanted their kids to develop a lifelong faith. So around the time that my older sister was about to go through confirmation, they decided to make a change. And so we ended up finding this little non-denominational Christian church that was meeting in an elementary school gym. And we were like members, 50 through 53 or something. And that church, probably had more of a, standard Protestant Baptist kind of doctrine and belief system, nothing controversial or anything. And so we really grew up there. That's, when I was 9, I'd been through, seeing a lot there. A friend of mine there in class in junior church said, Rick, you need to become a Christian. And I was like, okay. And so I went home, told my dad, and he's like, well, let's talk about this. And my parents talked through, and I said, yeah, that all makes sense. And so I gave my life to Christ at age 9, got baptized. We stayed at that church. My parents were there until they moved away from Colorado a couple of years ago. And by the time they left, it was, the full-on mega church, several thousand people. And my dad ended up being an elder there for like 20 some years. And, mom was very involved in things. Both my sister and I came to know the Lord there. A little bit towards the end of high school, I started going with a friend to an Assembly of God church, got to experience that a little bit, really wrestled at times with, feeling like I was called to ministry. So I kept various points in my life trying to go and become a pastor, and God kept shutting that door. At some point, maybe I'll permanently listen to him on that. I keep trying. I had ups and downs in faith and times for all falling away and coming back. I think I always can tell that in my life, there's two big spaces in my soul. There's the God space and the church space. And there's been times that I've been in a good church, but not been personally close to God. And so one of those holes is filled. And then the opposite can be true. Where I'm really in that sweet spot is when I've got my relationship going strong with God and in a church. And so I'm a big, big advocate for having that kind of Christian community, in a absolutely in a formal church setting, but also in things like getting together like this. And so, yeah, I, ended up, getting married once when I was young. Not the wisest decision. Wonderful, wonderful woman, but we were too young, and then we were also too young to really kind of follow through on that vow and commitment, and we ended up getting divorced. And I, at that point, was finally going to college for nursing. Made the switch to go to challenge myself to try for pre-med, and then again was wrestling with do I go to med school or seminary? Med school or seminary? And pastor mentor told me, after me bothering him with this question for months and months, just said, Rick, I think that I would give, as a pastor, I would give anything to have the kind of access to people in their time of need that a doctor has. And that's really what made the decision. So at that point, I was now remarried to my wonderful wife, Katrina. I went to med school in Des Moines, Iowa, basically to be halfway between our families. Did residency down in Florida. And then a friend from med school got the local hospital up here to recruit me, knowing that I wanted to do small-town family medicine. We thought it'd be a couple of years, get some loan repayment, and then figure out the next step. Well, we've been here now 8 years and loving it. So God's really been working on me through those years to make my work, my ministry, that I really do use it. So, well, you mentioned high school, though. I had to laugh at that because my graduating class from my high school was 683.
Wow.
My actual student population was 2,004.
But that Denver, Colorado, that area, correct?
It's one of the north suburbs and stuff. So yeah, the high school, so the area that my high school served now has 3 high schools within a couple of miles of each other. I mean, it's just gone gangbusters even.
Well, knowing that you were born and raised and went to church around Denver, Colorado, I think the question that everybody would be asking, Dr. Rapp, is were elk hunting and edible marijuana, was that part of church growing up?
No, on either front. So while elk hunting is a thing, hunting is not as big of a deal there. I mean, there are parts of the state where hunting and fishing are absolutely huge, right? But it's kind of a more broad, outdoorsy world. And I shock people when I say, like, yeah, I grew up, I spent the first 20 some years of my life in Colorado, and I never went skiing once. I mean, it's like I was worried about tree damage and skull damage. And back then there was definitely a lot of use of certain substances, but it was not yet legalized.
So edibles weren't part of communion then at church?
No, there was none of that. Right. Back then we had Boulder, Colorado, and we would jokingly call that, 25 square miles surrounded by reality. Then it kind of became all of the populated Front Range of Colorado is kind of like that, except for the bastion of Christian and conservative stuff in Colorado Springs.
Well, we are blessed to have you in our community, Dr. Rapp, and I think Johnny V would agree with me that you have a prophet's beard.
Yes, wisdom of I'm working on the prophet.
Oh, it's a beauty. It's a beauty. So now, Dr. Smith, please tell us your journey to the mighty, mighty North Woods of Wisconsin.
Well, it took me till I'd start out by saying this in terms of a faith journey. It took me a little bit longer than you guys to get to that spot. Minnesota. I grew up where hockey is religion, as opposed to religion being religion, and so my youth was dominated by sports, watching sports, playing sports, and going with my family to sporting events. And I always joke with people when we talk about church, I say I went to church more than any of you guys and growing up, and that's because we played roller hockey in a church parking lot every single day after school. So that was what my childhood was like. But I grew up in Duluth, Minnesota, very fortunate. It's a wonderful place to grow up. And, as I said, hockey is king in terms of athletics up there, but just the outdoors, hunting, fishing, skiing, anything you can imagine. That's why Duluth has been named, one of the top outdoor destinations in America for a reason. It's beautiful. In the summertime, it's like living on the beach. In the winter, it can be miserable, but there's still a beauty about it that I appreciate to this day. So I was fortunate to grow up that way.
It's frozen San Francisco.
It is, but with nicer people and nobody's taking a dump on the sidewalks in Duluth, at least that I'm aware of. So.
Just the dogs.
But it was a good way to grow up, and I ended up graduating from a school called Hermantown High School, which is basically a suburb of Duluth. And I went to the College of St. Scholastica to start my undergraduate degree. And that is where I moved in next door to my soon-to-be girlfriend and my wife. I'm fortunate to have a story where my wife is actually the one that really led me on my faith journey. My wife had been part of youth groups growing up. Her family had been to church, maybe not all the time, but the seed had been planted, especially through her grandparents, I think. And she had some really good friends in college that were, really good for her in terms of keeping faith at the center of their lives and were a positive influence. And thus, she became a positive influence on me. And it started out in order for me to get in her good graces that I followed her to church. And I used to say the best part of church back then was that the place we started going had wonderful coffee. And that's what hooked me. But before you knew it, I started paying attention to the message and just kind of like peeling the layers of an onion. Over time, it started to sink in, and it got me kind of asking, life's big questions. What is the meaning of all this? What's my purpose? What is my destination? Because as my athletic career started to wind down, I was fortunate to play hockey all the way through college. And as my athletic career wound down, you start to kind of wonder, okay, well, who am I and what in the world is next? And I think, whether your athletic career ends in high school or youth sports or college or professional, when your life is kind of dedicated to that, you kind of lose your sense of being. And that's like kind of a tough thing to go through. And so I was searching for answers. And fortunately, my last year of college, I had a hockey coach at that time who was a Christian guy, and he wasn't super frontal about it, but, made sure that it was kind of part of some of the message he passed on to us intermittently. So between that influence and my wife, I started going to church, and God fortunately put the right people in my path that just continued to promote that in my life. And before you knew it, I was a practicing Christian and a follower of Christ, just like the rest of you. So it took me a little bit later to get there, but eventually I did. And, obviously God has a plan, and that was his for me. And I'm fortunate to come to faith when I did.
Yeah, well, I think that's a great place for us to take a break for a second.
Hey.
We'll be right back, guys, and we're going to get into some good topic.
All right. Well, welcome back to the Axe and Scalpel podcast. Now, the purpose in the introductions and talking about our faith a little bit here tonight, fellas, was to kind of get into our main topic, and that is the Trump effect on faith. And I know that seems like kind of a weird thing to say given Trump's personal history, et cetera, but I want to get into this a little bit because it feels like there's something different in the air in our country since November 5th. It seems like there's a different attitude, a different level of positivity. It seems the fear that we saw happen after the first election of Donald Trump in 2016 outside of the media isn't really there, or at least as vocal as it was back then. Tell me if I'm right or wrong there, fellas.
Well, yeah, I think you're right. I try to pay some attention, across the spectrum a bit on things, and there's definitely a lot of support for a lot of the things that are going on. I mean, and Trump has he's taken this populist stance on a lot of things. So he's not fully conservative Republican. He's not, liberal Democrat or anything like that. But there's still fear. But I think a lot of people are starting to realize that are on that fear side that there's it might not be the apocalypse that they were expecting, but there's a lot of they're seeing that there's a lot of good. I think everybody knew that government needs to get smaller and that sort of thing. So I think on the political side there is a lot more optimism than we've had in a long time in this country. And I think a lot more optimism in a broader group of people, feeling like their values are being represented a bit.
I agree. And when we were talking off air, unfortunately, John, you had a really good point. And that was that, it seems when Trump speaks, the response is different this time. Do you want to get into that a little bit?
They seem to be more patient, and it almost seems like people are willing to look at stuff themselves. And a lot of that might be because they have found that they can't necessarily trust the media themselves now either. Nobody likes to get deceived.
Yeah.
And a lot of people finally were able to understand that, gosh, dang it, I was deceived. Nobody likes to be wrong. Nobody likes to admit that they're wrong. But that's one of the things that Trump has done is they're used to the shock value, but now they're at least willing to step back for a second, wait for things to unfold. Normally, the guy ends up being right. And you look at some of the big things that he's talking about, it's hilarious to be he's good for the Globe community.
Yeah.
Gulf of America. I mean, Globe's kind of, he's good for so many businesses. Globe's at Google. Google already switched it from what I understand. So if you look at a lot of the outfits, Google Maps and everything, it now does say Gulf of America. Look at the stink people had about the Greenland deal.
Yeah.
Why not? Canada, to me, is hilarious, the way he just keeps poking at them.
Yeah.
Join us. We'll be fine, and all that. And now Gaza, the Panama Canal.
Yeah.
The guy he's on TV every day. And even the people that
Voice.
seem to want to say it's because it's him. No, he's bringing up stuff that just seems like globally fantastic ideas, and it's proud that it's coming from the guy leading our country.
But even if it's not, it seems like what did you say, Jake? He's taking a different tact on, I'm going to throw something out there and see,
Yeah, exactly. And what you're seeing in conservative media, and they keep referring to it, it's kind of what we're referring to tonight, is conservative media is calling it the Trump effect, right? It's when he speaks, things change. And where I've noticed it is all of a sudden, especially like in terms of things that used to be really seriously politically incorrect, for instance, or, just as an example, the talk of men playing women's sports. It was all of a sudden he signs an executive order. Nope, not going to happen anymore. And you get a statement an hour later from the NCAA that says, well, it looks like that's the rule and we'll abide by it. Like 4 years ago, I never would have expected the NCAA to just kind of bend the knee that easy to something like that. And it's like we're living in bizarro land. I mean, I support him and everything in these things, especially as a dad with 3 daughters who are all in sports. But it's just crazy to me how things have changed in a matter of 8 years. And what I'm kind of getting at with that is people seem bolder all the way around. And one of the areas where all of a sudden people are bolder is in their faith, it seems. It just went that far. And Trump is not exactly the best example of a dedicated Christian, at least in his personal life previously. We don't necessarily know what he's like now. Maybe he has changed. But obviously the very public failures he's had, and, you go back to the 2016 election and some of the locker room talk, it's that, he's not exactly the best example. But now all of a sudden you have athletes and celebrities, it seems, that are more bold about their faith because, like I said, is it the Trump effect? I just want to read for you guys a couple of quotes here that I've come across recently in the last few months, just in terms of athletics. So UFC heavyweight champion of the world, John Bones Jones, in Madison Square Garden, defeats Stipe Miocic to win the world heavyweight champion, or I guess retain the world heavyweight championship. And in his post-fight interview in front of the whole world with the president in attendance, he says, "Jesus loves you." He proclaimed this to thousands at Madison Square Garden. And he says, he says to Joe Rogan, "I tell you what, man, I cannot take credit for a gift like this. I really owe it all to him. I know that there's millions of people around the world watching right now. And I just want to let you guys know that Jesus loves you very much." And that's all I'll say about that. In the post-fight speech of the world heavyweight champion, probably the baddest man on the planet, and he tells everyone Jesus loves them. What is happening?
Yeah. Well, I mean, and you had all of the guys, I'm a big Ohio State fan, all of those guys after the national championship. I mean, and we've been hearing all year from that locker room. These guys are doing Bible studies and they're talking openly about their faith. They're attending these rallies at a university, which right now is, granted, it's not like Princeton, Harvard, Yale as far as some of those things, but they're definitely, becoming more vocal. And I think having good discussions about it. So what sorts of things have you heard, Johnny?
Is it cool to be Christian again, boys? Is it getting to the point to where it might be just cool to be Christian again? Quite possibly to be bold enough to say that.
That's what I'm getting at. I mean, I shared this quote from John Jones after, the title fight, but then I printed off another one here for us. And this was Patrick Mahomes around the time of the Super Bowl. Says, "I'm going to use this stage and this platform, win or lose, to give glory back to him, to hopefully bring others close to him, that they can have the same love for life that I have." That is quarterback Patrick Mahomes, probably the most famous football player on the planet. And John, you followed sports a long time, and you know the difference between, somebody generically thanking God after they score a touchdown or at the end of a win versus the kind of language that Patrick Mahomes is using here. There's a difference, is there not?
If you like the guy or not like the guy, you got to respect that he's had there's been 2 instances now where they tried to pride him a little bit. Remember when his wife happened to I believe, liked some comments on the Trump Facebook or something like that.
I remember that.
And then they tried to get him on the podium to talk about stuff, and the guy had him with, I'm not a Mahomes fan. I'll say all the things you're supposed to, but yep, I'll root against him for whatever reason. But the guy held himself to a pretty high standard when he didn't fall for what the media was trying to get him into. And he just said, look, everybody has the right to their own opinion, to the time to do their own research. And I'm just here to let everybody know that it's okay to vote for whoever you want to, is pretty much what I got out of that whole thing with him.
And and I'm not saying here that there is some sort of direct connection necessarily that, Patrick Mahomes and John Jones, for instance, have been watching Donald Trump and they decide based on observing Donald Trump that we're going to be more bold in our faith now. But it just seems to be that there's kind of a change where people all of a sudden, because Trump is so boisterous and so out loud and in your face and unafraid to say what he thinks, right or wrong, that is rubbing off on people in all kinds of different walks of life. And this seems to be part of it.
I think that's a piece of it, but I also think he brought out, through the election especially, brought out that there is actually still a core, that the majority of this country, even if it's a small majority or whatnot, are still anchored to some traditional faith-based values, whether they might call them faith-based or not, but that it's okay. There is still this group of people out here that believe this, and so maybe people are more confident to say no, that there's at least a majority that agrees, and so I'm not going to get canceled now from this by saying this, and it can have a message. But I think it did say that now it's okay to speak these views that are different from the more progressive culture. I think people are just realizing, like, this thing got so unsteady. Just this whole thing got so unsteady, and when you're in an earthquake or a ship that's just tumbling around and stuff, what are you going to do? You're going to grab for something solid. And I think that's as much of anything is that, people are grabbing for something. They want something solid. They want something absolute. They want some truth.
Johnny, you've been in media and radio. Do you ever get hate mail?
I deserve it. I probably should have, but I could truly say maybe it's a testament to the people that maybe listened. They just kind of kept it to themselves or something. I wish I had a good story to tell you about. Oh yeah, I got one of the weird letters where they cut the words out of the magazine so I couldn't tell what it was. And
would have had to say something critical about, like, Aaron Rodgers. And
but maybe I wasn't too shocky enough, I suppose. But
if anybody does end up listening,
I'll probably get one after this episode.
That's exactly
open it up.
I'm saying is now that we've brought up Trump, it's almost inevitable that you're going to get a response to this if people listen to this, and I can guarantee, and I'm sure you guys agree with me, is one of the first things that somebody's going to say to us is, how, despite what we've said here, how in the world can you equate Donald Trump with any version of Christianity? How in the world can you connect those two? Look at what he's done. He's been convicted of assault, and he's cheated on his wives and been adulterous, and he's been this sinful human being. How could you ever equate Donald Trump with Christianity?
Yeah.
And we'll probably get that from non-Christians and Christians alike.
Yeah.
What do you guys say to that?
I'll say he's admirable. If you had the access to the things that Donald Trump has had in his lifetime, when it comes to the fact that guy never drank, he never did drugs, and if his weakest link is he was attracted to women, I'll give that guy. How would you have acted if almost anything that is going to please the flesh on this earth is accessible to you?
Yeah.
The fact that Trump was able to use so many of those things, and the worst thing you normally hear is he might have been, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
There's worse things the guy probably could have done. And actually, if you think about it, even his ex-wife seemed to not mind the guy.
Yeah.
I mean, if you hear them talk about him, it's normally
Well,
not
you-
that
you-
bad.
Yeah, you think about like, so he, at least in some of those instances, abused his authority and done some pretty awful things, and he's paid some pretty significant penalties for it, and that's right. I think we've got to condemn some of the things that he's done as sinful and evil, and we all have to strive not to do that and treat women better. There's a really long, unfortunate history there. But I also go back and say, okay, let's look in our Bibles. All right, so the Apostle Paul wrote most of the New Testament. What was the first thing we saw him doing in the New Testament? It was, basically overseeing the murder of the new Christians before he had his conversion. We look at David in the Old Testament. Man after God's own heart, great guy, wrote all of the Psalms. And what was his sin? Well, he committed adultery and he had the husband of the woman murdered. I mean, all of these, God has chosen to work through us as human beings on this earth as his creation. And we are all sinners,
And he's chosen some pretty unique people over time.
He's chosen some unique people. The only perfect human being was Jesus himself, and that's what we're striving for. I don't know where Trump is in his journey right now. I feel like I see a difference post-assassination attempt in him. But even before that, another thing I have to say is how many rich billionaires still have their 3 adult kids hanging close to them and showing them loyalty? I mean, or, he's done something right.
I mean, with such public failures he's had, the people that are close to him seem to be so loyal. There's got to be something there.
Yeah.
I mean, because the people, like I said, as you said, that his kids and the people that are close to him, I mean, he somehow generates a lot of loyalty, and everybody seems to talk about, it's been close to him, what a wonderful human being he is if you get to know him. And obviously, whatever his positives are going to be amplified, of course, by the conservative press, and his negatives are going to be amplified by the liberal press. So it's hard to get a grasp, but it's unique to watch.
You take one specific thing. So like the DEI stuff, right?
Yeah.
He's comes in, it's like, we're going to get rid of DEI. And there's a great deal of our population that are particularly worried about that, because there's been, in our history, a lot of suppression, the horrible history of slavery. There's been a lot of suppression of women going far back in history, farther than the U.S. But let's look at Trump's cabinet. All right, yeah, you've got some white men, but you've got black men, you've got black women, you've got women holding higher positions of authority that have never been in before. Our first female chief of staff, who is really kind of running a lot of the behind the scenes stuff in the thing. We've got a Treasury Secretary who I believe is openly gay. You've got an Indian American running the FBI, right? I mean, he's still taking who he feels is the best person for the job: white, black, brown, male, female, gay, straight, and they're still willing to work for him, and but it's not a forced thing, right? It's not a quota thing. And he's trying to do, hire the best person for the job. And then he's trying to get rid of waste. And I don't think I've ever heard him say that diversity and equity is a bad thing. What he's saying is pouring all this money and setting up quotas and things doesn't solve the problem of any remnant issues that we have. We've got to get back to the heart of it. We got to invest in things that actually work.
And as we've said, multiple times here, we don't know for sure where he's at, because he seems to be, other than when maybe he's in front of the microphone at something like the National Prayer Breakfast or the March for Life, he's pretty focused in on whatever the task of the day is. And I mean, he's going at an unbelievable pace. So you don't hear a ton from him about his personal faith. J.D. Vance, our vice president, is maybe a little different story. He gave obviously a keynote speech here at the March for Life, And he is a guy that seems to just represent himself really well in terms of his boldness about his faith and the way he talks about it in public. J.D. Vance, what are your thoughts?
Well, it's another great example of Donald Trump. J.D. Vance was the guy that criticized him there for a while. Most people think that Trump would never even give a guy like that a shot. Oh, once you cross me once, you're dead to me sort of deal. And it just shows that in the 4 years he was president, the 4 years that he wasn't, he did grow. And Rick brought it up brilliantly, actually. This time around, you could tell he doesn't have to listen to who are supposed to be the experts at the time. His first term, he was banking on these people knew a bunch of stuff. Hey, you're the expert. I'm the new guy. You've been doing it for a long time. I'll listen to you. I'll listen to you. And he found out that's where we got the term rhinos and all that stuff, right? The people that kind of pretend to be on your side and then behind the scenes, they're really not. But that's one of the things that it's just been you can see now, and you said it. It's not so much women or race that he's hiring, not even experience. He's hiring from his gut. And we all in this room know that sometimes the gut is the most influential thing that you can kind of listen to. It doesn't always work, but a lot of times, what do you always say? My guts told me. I had that gut instinct. There's nothing wrong with that. When you just have a good feel by what you know about that person, that if I could put them in this position, they're going to do a fantastic job. And that's Trump throughout his career. Even like you mentioned it earlier, Jacob, most of the people that they interview that worked for him, they not only have a story about how it was great to work with him, but on a personal level, how he went above and beyond to help their family in something.
Yeah.
There's a lot of this stuff, and maybe that's why Trump doesn't want to put his Christianity on his sleeve, because he knows that people are going to detract and use that against him more than they will J.D. Vance right now. They'll weaponize Trump being a bold Christian because of all the sins maybe that he's done in his past. And it's probably better holding that, because he knows deep down, he says it all the time,
wow,
God saved his life.
Yeah.
He doesn't really have to say much more than about every fourth day, he will mention, I truly believe God saved my life, because there was too many things on that day that went off the same routine that allowed that bullet not to hit him.
As we kind of put a bow on this subject, fellas, I think, one thing is irrefutable. I don't think our discussion of this here is going to change the fact that Donald Trump and his effect on Christianity is going to continue to get debated.
Right.
But I think one thing is not going to get debated, and that is that you now have an administration here in place, and we're fortunate enough as believers where it is going to it's going to give us the best chance at seeing positive change for the faith-based community, than we've seen in a number of years. I think that's irrefutable, because this seems to be the most pro-family, pro-life, pro-faith administration that we've seen in a long time. And for that, I'm excited to see what will happen the next 4 years. I hope, Trump has a history of doing what he says. The Supreme Court obviously changed, and a couple of years ago, Roe v. Wade was overturned, and that is the result of, the people that Donald Trump put in place. There's no denying that. And so I'm kind of excited to see what the next couple of years and will show in regards to faith and policy. And, kind of the thing I wanted to close with, with Trump being such a controversial figure, and Rick, maybe you can take us out on this, but
yeah,
what I always think about when you think about a figure like Trump, or even our new Secretary of Defense who's controversial, or an athlete who's, maybe very frontal about this faith now, but has had a lot of sin in their past, is maybe the most, or I shouldn't even say maybe, for sure, the most important scene in our Bible, or the most important words in our Bible happen when there is a cross at Calvary, and there are two men to the sides of our Lord and Savior. Rick, you want to elaborate on what happens there? Because I think it really throws you when you think about what happens here in this scene as Jesus is breathing his last breath.
Yeah, you have this scene where Jesus is crucified with two robbers or thieves on either side, and one is mocking him again, saying, "What are you? You say you could heal these people, you can raise other people from the dead, you can't even get yourself off the cross." And then the other is, uh, you know, condemns the other robber for doing that, and asks Jesus if he could join him in heaven. And Jesus there on the cross gives this robber next to him forgiveness for his sins, and says, "You'll be with me today in heaven." And that's ultimately the point. We can talk all of these things and how this life is the best politics and the best position, and all of the issues that are very
who's in and who's out, right?
Debate who's in and who's out. But it comes down to belief in Jesus Christ.
Where do you stand?
Where do you stand with him? That's what matters.
The eyes and the cameras aren't on you. Where do you stand?
And that's, I think, we need to be praying for everybody in our home, in our neighborhood, and our presidents, and our states, and just that they would be pursuing a relationship with the God who created this universe and this world, and that they are real people.
All right, fellas, now this is definitely going to be one of my favorite segments, because this is truly when the show turns into two doctors and a dummy. And we are going to start in the healthcare field. And this time of year, as you're well aware, just about everybody out there either is suffering from a flu, they know somebody's got the flu, or they're bracing themselves for the inevitable when they do get the flu. What is going on, and why is this thing so rampant again?
Yeah, so, first I got to give the little spiel. It says, I'm giving my opinion as an independent physician, not on behalf of my employer, not speaking on behalf of my employer. And if you are sick, please call your doctor, go to the ER, whatever that is. The flu. All right, so we've had, there's been a lot. Influenza in this area. We've also seen a fair amount of COVID. We've seen norovirus coming through. Just a lot of virus again. And this year the whatever it is, and it seems to be doing the same no matter what you test positive for, or more often than not test negative for. It's just this long thing that's lasting about anywhere 6-8 weeks of really just feeling the cough and some of that stuff persisting. I think there's just been a lot more of, we might have let our guard down a little bit. As much as you might have hated some of the restrictions around COVID, like the social distancing and the masking. There's some wisdom in not, sitting immediately next to somebody who's hacking up a lung, but so we're seeing a lot of that, so people are dealing with a lot of just heavy congestion too. So I think it's the stuff that really gets people down is just when you can't breathe well, the congestion in your nose, the lungs, but even then just the long persisting cough that won't leave you alone and wakes you up at night. Especially the kids are getting high fevers. I know Jake's very familiar with that. And it's just it's just really knocking you down. So there's not been that much. I think it's not so much that the flu is that bad. It's just that we're not seeing a lot of the very mild colds.
From a practical standpoint, then, Doc, I ask you, as a father of 5, what steps can I do practically to try to avoid my kids getting it?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I want to dispel a little bit. Like, kids should be sick. Like, they need to be sick 5 to 6 times a year. Like, you want to build an immune system, they need to be sick. Now, they don't need to be sharing water bottles and things like that. You can do some things like that. um, teaching them some good things at school. Like,
Over here, I'm going to spin your mouth quick. It's good
yeah,
for you.
yeah. Like I hear some of the stories of the hockey teams, sharing water bottles and stuff. That's super fun. But just teaching them, like, all right, don't share water bottles with other kids at school. If you see a kid who's sick at school, keep your distance a little bit. If your kid is sick, you can keep them home. But again, it's there's going to be some of that. Honestly, what I would recommend is just keep them well hydrated, good stuff, not your junk drinks. They need to be water, your vitamin C thing. So your orange juice is good. Get them taking a zinc, multivitamin with some zinc. Zinc is the one thing that's really ever been shown to reduce the frequency and the length of a common cold. So zinc is good. I say even just a good tablespoon or two of good local raw honey seems to kind of keep some of the allergies type stuff away. So the less irritated and inflamed you are in general, it's going to probably reduce your susceptibility to illness. But I think another big thing is we've got to get our kids sleeping. They need good sleep. Get them to bed at a decent time. Stop the social media. Get off the screens. They need a consistent enough sleep. We all need that. We need, staying well hydrated. It's a big thing, but we also got to not be so busy. I mean, that's the biggest thing that's going to drag all of us down is we are not getting enough just rest and downtime. Our bodies are constantly in a state of stress. Your immune system's going to be weaker. So
practical question number 2 then is, and I think a lot of parents face this dilemma, is my kid is sick. He's coughing. He's got a fever. Clearly something's wrong. I'm a concerned parent. I've read the internet and it tells me the worst things out there.
Yeah.
I read the internet and I see, a kid in New York City, he died from the flu.
Yeah.
When is the right time to bring my child into the hospital to see someone like you?
Yeah. So, like I said, kids should be sick. They should get fevers. It's good to have fevers. It's good to cough. It's good to have vomit. It's good to have diarrhea. It's your body trying to get rid of stuff. Our body is desperately trying to get these bugs and viruses out of us, and we do everything in our power to keep them in us. Like, all right, let's take something to stop the nausea. Let's take something to stop the diarrhea. Let's stop the cough. No, that's your body trying to get rid of stuff. You need to let it happen, and then at some point exercise some reason. Like, okay, my kid does need to sleep. So, if they have a fever greater than 104. All right, let me define what a fever is. A fever is a temperature of 100.4 or higher. Okay, not 98 when my kid normally is 97. No, that's
98.6 if you're more than that.
98.6 is normal. Okay, and you can sit there and say, "Oh, I usually am a 97, so when I'm 99, it's bad." I was like, "Yeah, you're not gonna die from it. You're fine."
Thermometer just sucks.
Yeah. No. Okay, if a kid goes over 104, they need to be brought in immediately, okay? If an adult goes over 100, 102, 103, they really should come in. But first, get some Tylenol in their system, some ibuprofen in their system. Even if you're not a drug person, it's time to get something in them to try and bring it down. If it's not coming down, then that's another time to get in. Something needs to be looked at. But let them be sick for a little bit and see. At some point, trust the mom instinct, the dad instinct, but it's but also I think a big thing is don't demand antibiotics all the time. The majority of these things are viruses. They are viruses. Viruses are not bacteria. Antibiotics are antibacterial. They will not kill a virus. I mean, and modern day, you go into the doctor feels like we have to give them something because they think of us as we're, just their consumers and we're a producer and we have to give them something.
I might have to take this back. A buddy of mine left a doctor a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
The doctor would not prescribe any sort of antibiotics. He wasn't very happy.
Yeah.
Wanted to get a second opinion. Ended up going into the same place. And they basically gave them to him.
Yeah.
Do I get to tell him that the doctor was more than likely right.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, and that's the thing is we're struggling.
Yeah,
with this whole like antibiotic.
You're seeing a quack,
So
man.
we are creating super bugs by giving antibiotics to every little thing because it will kill off some of the bacteria, but the ones that survive are the ones that are resistant to the antibiotics, and so we need to reduce that. So it's being reasonable and knowing like it's okay for kids to be sick. It's going to be miserable. In an ideal world, you know what? The problem is, so you have 5 kids. What's going to happen is you're going to cycle, right? You're going to go through months where somebody in your house is sick all the time. And that's just part of it.
Trying to make them cry.
So that being said, I got one final question for you, and forgive me for this, but I'm going to force it on you because I feel like we need to for anybody who's going to listen to this. And I think it's important for both your world and my world to know what somebody's seeing clinically and benefits and, maybe lack of benefits. The flu vaccine.
Yeah. So flu vaccine. So there are thousands upon thousands of flu viruses. All right. They're all slightly genetically variable. And so every year they go through this extensive modeling to try to predict what are going to be the 3 or 4 most common variants of this virus, right? And it's a guess, but it's an educated guess. But then they create a vaccine that, can target those 4, 3 or 4. You'll see the term, trivalent, quadrivalent, whatever. But, and guess what? Some years they're great. They're dead on. Some years they're not. All right. It's usually going to provide you some degree of protection. Usually it's going to reduce how severe. It reduces how likely you are to get it and how severe it's going to be. Your body's going to have some immunity already built up for it. The same thing, COVID virus, all of these things, COVID vaccine, there's all sorts of things there. But here's the other thing people like to say: I got the virus and I got sick. And I said, no, you got an immune system response to the virus, which is what you want to have happen, right? You weren't sick. You didn't have the virus there that was going to kill you. But what makes us feel bad when we're sick is our body's response to the bad thing. All right. And so it's a good thing, although it's not ideal to have that reaction. Your body is building up a response to the thing that could kill you. Yeah, you feel bad in the time. Most of us are lucky and we only get a sore arm or something from it. So I'm more of an advocate, me personally, as a physician, I'm more of an advocate for flu shots than I am for some like the COVID shot. A lot of it has to do with what are your susceptibilities. If you're an asthmatic person, you have COPD, you have lung disease, you're older, you're an obese kid, you've got diabetes. I mean, a flu virus can kill you, right? So that's when it's important that you take those steps. I'll be honest, most years my kids don't get flu shots. Actually, I don't know that they ever have. My wife doesn't get flu shots, but I get them for several reasons. Number one, I would have to wear a mask around clinic if I didn't, which, it's one of the policies. I don't want to. But I have had some lung issues in my life. So, so that's why I do it. So it's, again, very personalized. I think that's it.
Well, thank you, Doctor. I have one final question. Has a patient ever been healed directly just by rubbing your beard?
Well, they frown upon that. I can't say that. I can say that the pharmaceutical industry has approached me about doing some sampling of my beard.
Probably.
Yeah. It's
nothing against Pfizer.
What do they prescribe? Strands?
Well,
7 strands 3 times a day.
Yeah, there's it's just gotten a little awkward at times, trying to acquire DNA and just sample out what's different about the beard DNA versus, the other stuff, because the other stuff's just as flawed as the rest of humanity. So
Well, speaking of human and DNA, let's switch to some different DNA. It's that time of year, it seems like. I've been talking
Four-legged animals.
to a bunch of buddies and stuff. People that got dogs.
Yes.
Seems like they can't stop scratching themselves. And I've been to these people's houses. I know that there's not like a flea infestation going on. But what might be going on with them dogs and the scratching right now anyways?
Well, it's funny. So the itchy dog, that is the most common question I get in clinic. Is my dog is scratching the tar out of itself. Doc, what in the world do I do? And why is he doing this? And start with the why. And I think it's kind of funny. And here's my theory anyway, is the way we treat our pets and the way we handle our pets' health has changed so dramatically in the last 25 to 30 years. I honestly think we had itchy dogs all the way along.
So
And nobody cared.
Nobody cared. When I was a kid, I'm a veterinarian, and when I was a kid, I remember my dad, we'd have pizza as a family, and there might be half of a pizza left over. And you know where that half of Domino's pizza would go? Oh, to the dog.
Yeah.
Right. And who would dare commit that sin now, right? But that's how times have changed. So I think we've always had itchy dogs. It's just now we want to do something about it. But what do you do when you do have an itchy dog? Well, if you watch pet food commercials or you read on the internet, what gets blamed more often than not is pet foods. And well, there is some truth to that. I spent, when I was coming up being trained as a veterinarian and working during veterinary school, I actually worked for an animal dermatologist. Believe it or not, those things exist. And they're growing, and you're seeing more of them now. But I worked for an actual animal dermatologist where all they dealt with was, skin conditions and things like itching. And again, this goes back to, okay, what do you actually see clinically? Food gets blamed all the time on the internet. If you only get this food or this vitamin, your dog will never itch again. Well, the vast majority of the time, the thing that makes your dog itch is actually environmental factors. So I tell people it's the same stuff that makes us sniffle and sneeze in the spring and the summer and the fall, the grasses and the pollens, the things that cause hay fever in the human being. Well, what happens in the canine is their first body system that gets irritated by these things is their skin. And the areas of the skin that get the most affected are the ears, the feet, the underbelly, the groin, around the genitals, the areas where either there's a lot of gland activity or there's not a lot.
Like rubbing of.
Right. And so those are the areas that get the most affected. And again, it's the things in the environment. And if you live in the upper Midwest, for instance, it's like inevitable, especially if you live in an agricultural community like ours. And so I've had patients over the years that the family takes, they're snowbirds, and they take their dog to Nevada or Arizona, and the dog has no problem while it's down there. But then it comes back to Wisconsin or Minnesota, and then it has trouble. So what in the world do you do about that when your dog has environmental allergies? Well, there's a couple things you can do from a practical standpoint. You can use human antihistamines. So, things like diphenhydramine or cetirizine, trade name Zyrtec or trade name Benadryl, those things. You can contact us, of course. I can get into dosing and that kind of thing if people wanted to comment or reach out, via the web, and we can give dosing information on those things. But you can try them. And human antihistamines have a moderate effective rate, maybe 40 to 50% in animals. And if the animal doesn't derive any relief from that, then they actually have, now canine-specific anti-allergy medications that an animal can take. They tend to be pricier, of course, than what you can get over the counter, like all things seem to be. And they're sold right now on a prescription basis. But essentially what they do is they modify your immune system's response to just not react or overreact to things like pollens and grasses that your dog is constantly exposed to. And in the canine world, we call having environmental allergies that cause itchiness, we call it atopic dermatitis. I think Dr. Rapp's probably used the same term in the human world, or eczema. Right?
Eczema, atopic dermatitis,
same thing, and really the same physiologic response. But those things are treatable, and there's some good medications out there nowadays. One in particular that has been kind of a game changer in the last 5 to 6 years is called Apoquel. It's an oral tablet that a dog gets twice a day to start for a couple weeks, and then gets on it once a day. And the vast majority of my patients clinically, probably 95% or better, get significant relief from that. And the owners are happy, and and the dog is happy. And sometimes I think it's worse for the owners because they can't stand trying to sleep at night and their dog's at the foot of the bed scratching itself and its collar's jingling and the bed is shaking and driving everybody crazy. But there is relief out there, and your veterinarian or myself, if you live locally, we certainly could.
I have a follow-up question on that, because this is what the first question that will be brought to me in the human world will be, well, what can I do that's natural? Jake, I want to do something that's natural.
Natural. That's a good question.
Replace your carpets?
Well, I mean, in theory, I mean, that's not actually, because as funny as it is, we do allergy test animals occasionally and find out exactly what they might be allergic to. And an animal can be allergic to, corn pollen, or might be allergic. A dog can actually be allergic to a cat, believe it or not. And then it's simply, if it's just a couple things like that, it's avoidance, right? And that's as natural as you can get. And I always tell people, the hard part is with natural remedies is there's no studies being done on these things really. And if they are, they're not very well published. And so there's no hard evidence that a guy like you in the human world or like me would look at and be able to drive an answer from. So I tell people it quite simply. I said, it's very low probability that anything you're going to find in the store that's quote unquote natural is going to hurt your dog. And if you find something that works, tell me about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got a stack of various things on my desk that that people have brought that works great for that.
And then I will tell the next person about it, and I'll even give you credit for it.
Yeah.
But the truth of the matter is it's very rarely that happens. Unfortunately.
Do cats handle this situation better than dogs?
It happens in cats, but it's less common.
They just don't care.
Yeah,
that's what I'm thinking.
And unfortunately, it is less common because there's just simply not as many treatment options in cats as there is in dogs. So they do get it. Oftentimes in cats, the go-to for a veterinarian is actually steroids. So for the lay people out there, things like prednisone, in that drug class, or if you haven't heard of prednisone, you've heard of cortisone cream.
Okay,
things in that drug class can be used on cats. I don't recommend you rub cortisone cream on your cat. Don't do that. But things
too much.
Class.
I'm assuming that steroids do the same thing too. Too much steroid on skin for too long breaks down their skin.
Same side effects. So I don't have, when I give this kind of advice, I don't have the exact same disclaimers as Dr. Rapp does, because
renegade.
My employer is me, so I can fire myself if I give out too much information. But what I do tell. What I would tell people is, if I'm not your veterinarian, before you try anything, do seek out contact from your veterinarian and get their advice.
So same thing, like how long should they wait and see before they bring in a pet?
I ask people the same question all the time. I say, on a scale of 1 to 10, how itchy is your pet? And I say 1 meaning you hardly ever see them itch themselves, 10 meaning they're keeping themselves or you up at night itching. And if it's anything 4 or 5 or above, that's probably the time you want to contact your veterinarian and see if you can't get some relief. Because if the skin gets too inflamed, if the rash gets too big, too widespread, it does set the situation up where your pet can then get things like staph infections or yeast infections, and those bugs can take over, and then it becomes more complicated to treat.
Final question. Do you ever get asked by the animals to have a letter for their emotional support human?
I think there's, I see a lot of, I see a lot of pets who would be better off by an emotional support horse, maybe going the other direction. Or an emotional support, a dog.
That being said, I dog tease, but
an emotional support bird, because us human beings, we tend to worry a lot worse than our canine friends do.
The thing is, these animals are quite valuable to helping people with their life and health, and so it's important to care.
Yes, sir.
With that, we are going to wrap up our premiere episode of the Axe and Scalpel podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Please watch for the second episode, which will be releasing on our usual release date of Mondays. It'll be happening this next Monday, where we'll be talking about the recent Trump speech to Congress, the pros and cons of what's been happening in these first few days of the Trump presidency. We'll be talking about the interaction with President Zelensky of Ukraine and many other topics, looking at both sides of the issues and trying to have good, intelligent thoughts on these issues. And also watch for midweek releases of our episodes that we will call Theo Cuts and Sports Cuts as we dive into other things of interest, such as faith and theology, sports, and other life interests for men here in the Northwoods. And if you enjoy this podcast, please like and review on your favorite podcast app. If you have any questions that you would like us to address, topics you'd like us to address, or just to share feedback, or even people you would like us to bring on to interview, please write us at axeandscalpelmedia@gmail.com, all spelled out. We want to finish our episodes just with a blessing for all of you. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May he make his face to shine upon you, and may he bring you peace. God bless.